All right, so ladies and gentlemen, today we have the pleasure of welcoming Issa Diabaté for this conversation. Issa Diabaté has a master in architecture. He graduated from Yale University, and he is currently the managing director of Koffi Diabaté Architectes office, which was founded in 2001 with Guillaume Koffi. They specialize in architecture, real estate development and construction, and previous architecture internship for Issa were with Goli Kwasi, Devrouot, and Pernell and Jean Nouvel et Catani, before really setting up with Guillaume Koffi. Very much involved in the topic of African urban issues over the years, Issa Diabaté has participated in a number of local change-geared initiatives addressing context-oriented problems. As an architect practicing on the continent, he aims to shed light on both the issues at hand and on those creative solutions required to build the African city of tomorrow. Issa Diabaté has participated as a speaker in many different events, conferences such as Other Desires at Columbia University in New York, 2016, African Leadership Network in Kigali in 2014, Design Indaba in Cape Town, 2004, to name a few, and also a TED Talk at Arusha in 2007. He is a member of Côte d'Ivoire Order of Architects, with whom he initiated Côte d'Ivoire's first architecture and building fair, Archibat, in 2007. Issa was also involved in the design world and as a laureate of the Dakar Contemporary Art Biennale in 1998. Most recently, he participated in exhibitions in Abidjan now in 2013 and Design Indaba in 2014 and 17. A key point that I wanted to highlight is his work collaboratively with Swedish giant group IKEA for their first collection by African designer called Overall. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Issa Diabaté. They're clapping. They're clapping. So Issa, let's get going.
Okay.
So you had a career that spanned several industries. Currently, you're the managing director of Koffi Diabaté. You also work as a mentor for young African architects while tackling local urban issues in Ivory Coast. Furthermore, you've participated in a number of events as a speaker. I mentioned them just now. Issa, what is your story?
Well, my story is quite linear when I think about it. And actually, it's really about being an architect. For me, architecture is not solely technical in the sense that it designs buildings and creates objects, but architecture has to do with a lot more than that. I think that the main topic that architects deal with is sociology. And unless you understand the people you work with, the environment you work in, the technology at hand, you will have a hard time giving the right response. And actually being an architect is not just being technical, like I said, but it also involves, I mean, we refer to the job of being an architect as a chef d'orchestre, which is somebody who just coordinates, really. An architect will know about air conditioning, will know about culture, will know about structure, but an architect is not an expert in any of these fields. But in order to organize our thinking, we have to pretty much tap on any of those subjects. And actually, you know, as many subjects as we have, you know, leads us to do as many initiatives as we can. So it goes from teaching to giving conferences to being a leader, you know, of younger architects, but also in your field, you know, become a developer and talk to people about design actually crafting designs so it fits your environment. So, but all those things, I think, are part of being an architect.
Well, that's quite a handful for any job, any industry. But thank you for sharing that. So, you know, you must have a number of anecdotes of challenges and opportunities that you face. Could you please share maybe 3 or 4 with us?
Well, I'll share a couple. I'll start with probably the challenges. One of the biggest challenge for me as an architect is how do you get to practice in the environment you practice in, and this environment being African, West African, you know, for that matter. And it took me a few years, actually it took us a few years to realize that we could not practice architecture the way we practice it in other places. Meaning that being an architect in Africa, you have to, you know, touch on all those subjects and all those things. And for instance, one event that I particularly remember is when I was leading this group of young architects, and we went to this place considered a slum or disenfranchised neighborhood, so we thought. and we go in there, and the first thing we do is try to do, you know, participative meetings. So we meet people from the environment and try to talk to them and try to make them understand that we would like to design a better environment for them, and we would like to actually make sense of their urban setting. And the first thing they told us is that they didn't need us, which was a big eye-opener. They were like, well, we don't need you guys to come in because you guys do not necessarily know our economy, you don't know our sociology, you don't know how we eat, how we work, how we live, and how dare you come in and try to design for us. This is not going to work. And then they move on to tell us that actually what is expected from the architect is not to come and design, but be a link between those neighborhoods and government. So they could have clean water, they could have electricity, they could have sewage and trash collection. And of course, as we started going in the neighborhoods, we realized that the neighborhood was quite organized. Actually, the social structure was very strong. And you had chiefs, you had women's associations, you had young people collecting trash, you had urban agriculture. And what actually was missed was the coordination of all those elements and sort of the link between those elements and the bigger structure called the city. And it's quite interesting when you go in those places to see the difference between those environments and the more the more official environments in our regular neighborhoods, which have mayors, and the attitudes of the people, depending on where they come from. When you come from such an environment, you are very careful about your own environment and how you collect your trash and the trash you produce and all those elements. When you live in a more official environment, I mean, you think that the mayor needs to do that for you. And so you don't take necessarily care of your what's inside of your door, what's in front of your door. You don't necessarily take care of your trash, and you think that the state needs to come collect it. So you have a very different relationship to your direct environment, and that was a big eye opener for me. Another, actually, it's not necessarily an anecdote, but it's part of our progress as architects is that we realized at some point that unless we started working on bigger geographical prints, we would have a hard time tackling the issues that we think are at the heart of architecture and urbanism in African cities. So for the longest time, we would try to talk to government officials and try to share our visions with them. Well, we would go to ministers and tell them, well, we need to do things this way or that way, and how come this is not happening? And of course, you know, while you're talking to them, they're all listening, and yes, and they agree with you. But the minute you leave the office, you know, they move on to their own business. So we realized that unless we were able to ourselves deploy our own vision, it would be totally useless to go and try to talk to somebody about our vision. And actually, in the end, why should they follow our vision, rather than someone else's? So we decided that in order to test our vision, we would have to to move from being architects to architects as developers. So we started a few years ago. We restructured the way we work. We created an entity that solely does development. So that we can now think in multiples, on a bigger print for more people, and provide architecture actually to more people, and go in that way, tackling other issues, that have to deal with urbanism, with, for instance, density. We need to live in denser cities. African cities are usually spread out. We need to learn to live as a community. So how do you take care of your environment with the other people who are around you, and not just your environment, your plot? How do you also deal with issues, related to mobility? Because all of those are issues that are very dear to us as architects. Urban issues are very, very much linked to the practice that we do. So if you are going to tackle issues about mobility, you need to think about how people move, and you need to think about in which ideal setting those people could live and not have to necessarily use their car to do the three classics, enjoyment, resting, and working. How can you do that on a very controlled plot of land? And to me, that is sort of crafting my vision of what should be the future of African cities. Move away from the huge megalopoles that we have a tendency to create, and rather, concentrate around the cell, what I call the cell, which is the very unit of people to live in, so that they still can keep a very human relationship to their neighbor.
I must, listening to you and the second point you were making, I must agree with one of the viewers who was saying that your style respects the nature and really fits in well with the environment, which is what you were saying. So thank you for that. During our conversation, you mentioned that you're a member of the Côte d'Ivoire Order of Architects. Could you tell us a little bit more about what it's about and what does it bring to the Ivory Coast?
Well, the Order of Architects is actually the organ that regulates the practice of architecture in Côte d'Ivoire. I was for a long time a member of the bureau with my partner, who used to be president of the Order of Architects. And this has been actually a tool to initiate things to sort of promote the image of the architects. In 2007, when we started Archibat, a lot of people in Abidjan did not really know what was the role of the architect and what was even the mission of the architect. And for us, it was very important that we would sort of bring back architecture to the mass, per se. And for us, we thought, we thought as designers, designers tend to think about something and then try to find the means to make it happen. So we sort of felt that there is a big interest in building materials, and so we decided that we were going to do a sort of an event where people selling building materials would come, and that would act as a sponsorship for all of the messages we wanted to talk about, with regards to architecture, including things like urban sprawl, density. So we would organize conferences between that event where the public, the general public, could just go and listen, so that they could have a very different idea of what an architect does.
Very interesting. So you're educating the public in some ways.
Yes.
In this field of architecture. That's really important, but not necessarily well known. What is your concept on building on that? What is your concept of architecture in Africa and the future of architecture in Africa and the world?
Actually, I'm very, very excited about the future of architecture in Africa. I think that something very special is happening on the continent. I think that too many too many times, I mean, we talk about the exponential demographic growth as a problem. To me, it's a great opportunity. When you couple that to the IT world that we live in now, it makes something great. It makes for a story like mobile money, for instance. And I really think that architecture, which tends to sort of get free of any frame, we like to sort of call ourselves free thinkers. We can finally start exploring things in a very different way. You know, for instance, when you see this company, this American company, moving to Rwanda as zipline to deliver blood to clinics that are off of the road network. It sort of creates a huge opportunity in terms of how do we start thinking about our own development. You know, do we put so much weight on physical infrastructure, or can we start now to rely on the sort of virtual infrastructure and save a lot of money as we go? We could do the same for education. We could do the same for so many other things. And I think that these change will really change the face of our living spaces. Imagine if you could just be totally autonomous, living away from the city, which, you know, our cities are, you know, tend to become more and more invasive on our private lives. So we could actually decide to live pretty much anywhere and still be connected to the grid and not so much rely on the huge physical systems that were built, you know, in other geographies. So for me, this is a great opportunity, you know, for us to rethink, you know, not only the architecture, but also the education, the health system. You know, how do we produce our food? We need to sort of free ourselves from the kind of structures that are, you know, very much heavy on city life and urban life.
Very good. I mean, the viewers are really agreeing with you and happy that you're speaking about educating African people in what architecture is all about and the role of architecture. So my next question is, because we have viewers from around the world, what advice would you give the ones among them who might want to become architects or who are architects and looking to become broader and bigger?
Well, actually, I would like to stress the fact that being an architect today is actually, especially when you live in Africa, is actually quite different than what it is in other places and what it has been traditionally. And I think that for those who would like to go into architecture, they have to think of themselves as thinkers first, and not necessarily as talented people drawing pretty things. We have to, I mean, we're moving in a direction now where architecture and the creative world is dealing with issues. For instance, if you're building a tower in Dubai, you know, it doesn't bring anything new to humanity. If you change the way people function.
Oh. So you're freezing a little bit. You froze for a minute. So you were on Dubai. You were speaking about Dubai, and then
yes, I was speaking about Dubai and how it's not really the example that architecture is going towards. I think that when you look at a lot of forums, a lot of the interrogations of younger architects, they are much more interested in actions that will change the world as opposed to something that would just speak to the glory of the contemporary world. So I think that in the future, issues are definitely going to be at the heart of practicing architecture.
Okay, very good. So a more humane also outlook on architecture.
Absolutely, definitely more humane.
You've had a career that spanned around different industries, but in the design and design of architecture field, what does innovation represent for you and for your current work, and also how do you continuously make sure that you keep learning?
Well, for me, innovation is key. Actually, I'm at the crossroad now, where I feel that I'm not as agile, doing or using all of the current technology, but moving a different space where I'm much more of a wise man, at such an early age. Just because technology has become so present in what we do, and the younger generation is very much in touch with it. So I see there a huge opportunity in how we can transform the way we do things. For instance, there is a young person here who organizes those events where he can gather 10,000 people, and he's not using any sort of traditional communication, not using any billboard, no TV announcement, no radio announcement either, but using Instagram and being very, very clever at using it. So of course, innovation is going to be part of our lives and is going to help us achieve what we're trying to do. But at the same time, I think that there needs to be a brain behind the innovation. The tool is not all of it. Of course, you have to think about it and use your tool wisely. And I think that all those tools mixed with the current state of Africa and its youth is going to be quite explosive in the few years, in the coming years. Between the next 10 years, I'm sure that we will see very, very significant changes.
Okay, very good. So, I mean, our viewers today are making a lot of comments, and one is summarizing what you're saying as technology as an opportunity for business development. I think it does fair to your point.
Absolutely. I totally agree.
Yeah.
I think the technology is sort of opening up doors that we haven't necessarily looked at. And I think what's even more interesting is that the technology is developed, traditionally in the Western world, but the field of application is actually our world. I mean, Africa, for instance. Because we're still quite virgin in terms of being linked to technology, being linked to the industries. I mean, we can easily leapfrog into other ways of other systems. So I think it's quite interesting time.
Excellent, excellent. I have a few more questions. So you've done some work with IKEA, and there's a collection that came out that's called Overalt, I think. Tell us a little bit more about this. What is this?
Well, that was a very interesting process. IKEA approached me because I'm a Design Indaba alumni. I presented at Design Indaba in 2014, and when IKEA got interested in creating an African collection, they just went to Design Indaba, and Design Indaba proposed me along other designers. And what was really interesting was to go through the creative process in the IKEA style. How do you start design? Do you just draw something, or how do you brainstorm? What are the issues that they want to see appear in the project? That was very interesting because in the end, those are not so far from the ones that we have to deal with. Issues of cost, for instance, issues of technology. How can we make it easy and fast? How can we make it cheap and light and yet beautiful? So these were issues that talked to me, and so I designed this piece for IKEA that is a chair, and my main goal was to make it quite easy to make. So it's made out of cutouts in a sheet of plywood, one sheet of plywood, and just cutting it out and assembling it gives you a chair with no screws, no nail, no glue. You can put it together in 30 seconds and dismantle it and put it flat in about half a minute. And to me, it had to speak to where I'm from. I live in an African megalopolis, and people in my city, when they're young and starting in life, they should be able to have access to design as well. So it has to be very cheap. And knowing our cities, producing something like that, you're just creating sort of a model for people to hack it. Really, if you see my chair, it's very easy to hack. It's very easy to transform, to bring something new, to attach it to it. And for me, it was just starting a conversation. You bring out this chair, and then you see what people make out of it. I mean, some people have painted it. I've had many versions coming back to me, completely altered. But that's I think that's what's so great. And for me, initially, the idea was to have the blueprint online, so that anybody in Abidjan, in Dakar, in Accra could just print it and cut it out and make their own chair. But IKEA shied away from it, claiming that it would be borderline in terms of responsibility. But yeah, but I still make more of my chairs here, and yeah, they're not made by IKEA, but they're IKEA chairs.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, it shows to your generous nature that you wanted to share the blueprint. Our viewers are very interesting, so I'm going to take a few questions of them before I get to my final question. There's one here. Do you use concept of vernacular African architecture, such as ventilation, in your thinking?
Yes.
That's an easy answer.
It is an easy answer. Well, yeah, that's because I mean, working here, we realized that the people who actually worked before us were not stupid, and we actually have to give that to them. And looking at traditional architecture, it's just layers and layers and layers of knowledge that we often to pass by. If you look at, for instance, the architecture that we have here in the south of Ivory Coast, and we see all those houses built with like wood sticks next to each other, nobody stops to think and realize that those wood sticks are actually not sealed, so they allow for air to go through in the very humid climates, so that the internal spaces do not accumulate humidity. But unless you start looking at the traditional architecture with a technical eye, you will not see those things. And of course, the translation of such a system in contemporary architecture is not necessarily wood sticks, but just making sure that you have cross ventilation in your house.
Very good. Yeah, it actually helps. It actually helps. The viewers are very, very engaged. So if you don't mind, we're going to pick up some of the points. Somebody is saying, I'm very proud of you. My question is, do you use wood substitutes in your realization for the protection of environment and the forest?
Not yet. It's probably very difficult to get wood substitutes here in the technological environment we're in. We're quite lucky to live in Côte d'Ivoire, where wood is not necessarily a problem. I mean, we have forest and we can grow wood very easily. So for us, using wood is actually a sustainable and a renewable resource, as opposed to other types of materials.
I'm not going to make. Sorry, were you finished?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not going to make an assumption that this gentleman McJohnson is not African, but his question is how African architecture can deal with economic issues and adapt their projects to low budget.
Well, that's what we do all the time. And of course, in order to fit the budgets, we have to think differently. And us moving into development is not foreign to that. The more we build, the cheaper we can build. And it's not always about materials. It's not always about vernacular looks. It's mainly about providing more and more habitat for more and more people. So of course it's quite kind of obvious to start with the higher end of the segment, but the ambition of course is to go to the lower end of the segment, and how do we craft an architecture for the lower end of the segment. And of course, in order to do so, you must work on a large scale, and you must think of it on a bigger scale. For instance, we're doing a project right now in Benin where we're building 20,000 low-income units. And actually, the process going through this was very, very interesting because 70% of what you do is about the urbanism. It's not about the units. And the more you move into it, you realize that economic units is actually just not one thing. It's many things. People want to live in a relatively affordable environment, not necessarily because they're poor, but because it makes sense for them. It also has to do with the distance they have to travel in order to go to work, and how this opportunity of building so many units, how does that become an opportunity for instance, companies who want to come and settle in and bring their offices. So it's very much all about the general ecosystem.
Excellent, excellent. So we touched on public speaking, and you've spoken in incredible arenas in the States and in different parts of Africa and in other parts of the world. What tips about public speaking and entrepreneurships would you give to our audience?
Wow, that's an interesting question, because I never really thought of myself as being a public speaker. And actually, before speaking at Design in Daba, I was very, very shy about taking the mic in public. And what has really helped me is structuring your thinking before you start speaking. Actually, you have to pretty much know what you're going to be talking about, so that's one thing. And also be in the shoes of somebody who's just telling a story, telling people, sharing your experience with somebody, and do it the most honestly you can do it. You have to be totally honest, you have to be totally transparent. Don't try to be an actor, and just be genuine. And usually when you have something to say, I think, you get people to listen to you.
Very good, very good. So I have one extra question. I found out that, I knew you like art. Architecture is part of art, but I found out that you actually paint, and I'm very keen on African art in general. Could you share a few thoughts about your work and also just African art in general, where it's going?
Yeah, my art, or the art I do, which I pretty much keep private, share much because I don't consider myself as an accomplished artist. But I think that art has this quality to sort of expand your thinking and allows you to really put yourself in the shoes of something or somebody who's totally free of any constraints. So that I like very much about art. And I tend to see that more and more in what younger artists, and especially African artists, are offering to us right now. Sort of the ability to move from one medium to the other, from video to photography to painting, mixing some of those at the same time, and really sort of shying away from the very orthodox way of producing art, and really using art as a vehicle to bring a message, to talk about who they are and how they're totally, in contrast with my generation, how they totally outside of the complex of the frame that I call the pyramid. The society, the colonialism, the West Africa, dichotomy, and all of that. They totally. Even when you look at fashion, for instance, how younger people are using fashion as a vehicle of expression, especially in Africa, it's quite amazing.
Yeah, very good, very good. Well, there are several other questions that people are asking. Apologies, I can't take all of them. Would you have a final message for our audience?
Oh, well, I'm really optimistic about the continent, really, really optimistic about Africa, and I think that we should not shy away from testing new things, testing new ways of inhabiting, of doing work, For instance, I was talking to young people recently, and they were telling me that they think that our generation is hugely inefficient because we get up in the morning, we get dressed, we drive to work, and you know, it takes us a while before we start working. And in the process, I mean, there are many things that we don't do. We don't spend time with our family, and they tend to think that the opportunity they have today with technology should allow them to sort of craft their life differently. And I really, really like this idea. And I think you were talking about technology before. You were talking about innovation, and I think that we have a great blank page to innovate on.
Excellent, excellent. This has been most interesting, as some of the viewers were saying. Very, very interesting. And before I thank you, let me tell everybody that next week we will have another extremely interesting person sitting where Issa is sitting today. That's Seyna Boudia. She's one of the leading communications and PR agency. She has one of the leading communication and PR agency on the continent, and a global agency too. So Issa, I really love this conversation. It's been fantastic. We've taken a little longer than usual. Some friends in New York are saying great conversation, 40 minutes, well invested, so interesting. People are really, really appreciating. So thank you very, very much.
Oh, thank you. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, and everybody, we look forward to seeing you again here next time. And for those who haven't seen it, you can tell people that it will be posted on my page, Ville Amadou Akoni, on Instagram, and also on our YouTube page at Acosphere, if you wish to see it again. Take care, everybody. Stay safe. Thanks, Issa. Thanks again.
Thanks, Gene. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.